All done. All silent. Going. Gone. So congratulations.
Welcome to the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. Each episode, we chat with real estate author and industry leader Peter O'Malley to discuss the current property market conditions and provide insights to assist you on your property journey.
Hello and welcome to Current Market Insights. I'm your host, Ciaran O'Brien, as always, with my good friend here, Peter O'Malley. Peter, how are you?
Really well, Ciaran. Great to see you again.
Great to see you, Peter. This week, I thought we might jump back into a bit of a market update. Since the last time we spoke, there's obviously been a lot happening. There's been a lot of media happening around, so many different things. But relevant to us and relevant to the current market, I've seen quite a bit of chatter on different channels, social media, etc., about interest rates. And I've seen some differing opinions, which is not unusual. But the message I'm seeing lately is a bit confusing, and I wanted to get your thoughts on what kind of information you're getting about the RBA and interest rates and where you think we might be heading from here as we move into to the meeting next month.
Yeah, well, this broke early in the week, Ciaran, as the RBA minutes from the last meeting were released to the media, and they showed that the odds of a Melbourne Cup Day rate rise had shortened considerably, to the degree that the central bank didn't seriously consider raising rates at the last meeting, but they did debate it and toss it around as an option. One of the comments that have come out from the RBA's minutes is they have a low tolerance for inflation, and if inflation is stubborn or even ticks up, that could well be the trigger for a rate rise. So when you look at some of the commentary that people have made around the case, around the place as a case for what will happen with interest rates, I think the former RBA Assistant Governor Lucy Ellis said it best when she said, whilst it was still unlikely the central bank would lift interest rates, it was now a possibility. And the possibility of further rate hikes was sort of off the agenda for many people leading into the release of these minutes this week. So the story has changed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think last time we spoke about interest rates was a couple of weeks ago, and we just come off the back of Michelle Bullock's first meeting as governor, and the decision was to hold. And I think we both agreed that things were looking a little bit more promising. There was some signs that maybe the inflation might slow and we might actually see a bit of reprieve across the market. What do you think is or has been the major drivers or motivators for inflation being a little bit stickier over the last few weeks and potentially causing problems for the RBA?
I think that's pretty easy to explain. Fuel, energy and rents. So nobody saw the cost of petrol doing what it did. You've probably got friends that own restaurants or work in restaurants or small businesses. Even today, one of the appointments I had today is in manufacturing, and he said that his energy bill has tripled in the last 18 months with no respite on the horizon. I've got a friend who owns a restaurant, and essentially energy costs are crippling his business and those of on the retail strip around him in his respective suburb. As we know, the rental issue has been prevalent for a long time now, for the last 18 months, which is also driving inflation. So, they've done a great job to move inflation from that sort of 7.8% down to below or around 6%. And lower, but I think at some stage it's going to get very, very sticky. And it's going to be hard to remove the rest of the inflation target to that 2 to 3% band where they want it.
I've seen a lot of media and talk over the last few months suggesting that inflation is particularly sticky because of the boomers and the sort of inner city elites that have got all this money and are paying high prices and just fueling that inflationary drive. You're suggesting, obviously it's power, it's rent, it's necessities of living in the current kind of climate. Would it be reasonable to say that, in fact, inflation's sticking and unfortunately we're all contributing to it by having to survive at the moment?
Oh, look, there's a great debate there. We're really coming down to the supply. Is it the supply or the demand that's causing the inflation? I really feel it's the supply. I really feel like myself that inflation is driven by global factors at the moment. And the Reserve Bank can do what they can do with the blunt instrument being interest rates. But I'm not seeing any suggestion in the economy that the inflation's been driven by excess demand. Yeah, sure, baby boomers are better positioned than most demographics in Australian society. There's no doubt about that. But are they causing inflation around the country? No, I don't think any economist sees baby boomers' demand in the economy as being the catalyst for why we are where we are at the moment. When you look at those factors that we discussed, fuel and energy have been exacerbated by what's going on in the Middle East, the sad events there and the conflict there, which looks set to go on for some time. And then when you're talking about rents are coming off a really low base, and unfortunately the more interest rates go up, the more landlords are likely to impose rent increases on rental properties, on their tenants. So they're the moving factors at the moment.
So do you think that, with everything we're talking about, with what is happening globally, with the influences coming down to Australia, do you think that we're likely to sort of see the end 2024, rate cut reprieve that we've previously suggested we might see?
I think it's just way too far out to call that at the moment. If you go back to the shocking events of what happened in the Middle East a few weeks ago and then everything that's happened since, that whole scenario could go anywhere at the moment. I don't like to say that, but that's the reality of what's happening. So I don't think there's too many people that are prepared to suggest what will be happening in late 2024 at the moment. Anything could happen in late 2023 yet.
No, it's true. Certainly don't want to make the same mistake as Philip Lowe and try and predict that far out.
No, and look, we've discussed Philip Lowe's great error there, but that does highlight that the challenges that central bankers have is they are beholden to events, as we discussed many times on these conversations. And again, since we last had an earnest look at events that were driving central bank policy, it's sort of had a major development yet again with this crisis in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's certainly amazing how much can happen in a week. I wonder then, Pete, I know you hate making predictions, but if you had to look forward 2.5 weeks or so to Melbourne Cup Day, do you have any suggestion on which horse might win the Cup?
I don't know which horse will win the Cup, and to be honest, I don't know which way the RBA will go with the rate rise either, which is probably of more interest to me at the moment. I think that'll come down to what the CPI number, which is due out later this week, and it'll probably be out by the time a lot of people have listened to our chat today. That will determine what they do on Melbourne Cup Day. I personally don't think that interest rates have peaked. I do think there is one, if not two more in it. Unfortunately, I think the issues in the Middle East will drive fuel higher, which will push across the economy with higher inflation, and that will be the unfortunate catalyst for the RBA to have to increase at least once more. Don't know if that's going to be November, December, or February, but I think it's in the on the agenda.
Very reasonable position to take, I think, Peter. I want to change focus a little bit now. We spend quite a bit of time talking about the current market around us here in the Inner West, but obviously property is such a national issue, and it's part of Australia's identity in many ways, I think. Just thought I might get some insights from you on what is actually happening around the country more broadly, and how, or if that is contributing to what's feeding into the RBA's decisions.
Yeah, it definitely is feeding into their decisions, Ciaran, and they mentioned rising property prices as being good for people's wealth effect and confidence in the economy. But again, it's just another contributing factor to inflation. It gives people more confidence to maybe borrow against or refinance against the newfound equity in their property, because Sydney property is up quite strongly this year, as we know. Up until the 1st of October, Sydney house prices, according to CoreLogic, were up 10.9%. and apartments were up 7.5% for the year. But if we broaden the scope a little bit further, some markets such as Brisbane, for example, house prices are up 8.8% there year to date. Perth, they're also up 8.8% year to date. So even if we look at Adelaide, which is a traditional boring market, house prices are up 5.3% there in Adelaide. When we come to Brisbane apartment prices, some of the strongest apartment prices in the country, keeping in mind that Brisbane was supposedly well oversupplied for apartments 5-6 years ago, and now apartments are up 8.4% year to date in Brisbane. So all of these factors where property markets seem to be pushing up beyond what anyone would have predicted is giving the RBA additional cause for concern. that's something to keep an eye on. There are markets that are falling. As we know, for example, Hobart was performing really, really strongly when the rest of the country was fairly sluggish back in sort of 2017, 2019 period, whereas house prices in Hobart are down 7% year to date. So different markets are handling the mortgage cliff, the changing environment that we're experiencing. They're all performing differently under this scenario. We're well past the halfway mark of people having to refinance under the mortgage cliff at the moment. There's a lag effect there that the RBA also mentioned in their statement.
Would it be reasonable also to suggest or to say that, some of the other markets that are rising really strongly, their median average is still, or the median price is still, reasonably well below Sydney or Melbourne. So those hitting the mortgage cliff are not necessarily going to be under the same level of stress?
Well, look, Melbourne's actually not the second. This surprises a lot of people. It's actually not the second most expensive city in Australia. Do you know what is?
I thought Melbourne.
Canberra.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, so the median price in Canberra is $956,000. This is the median house price, and the median price in Melbourne is $933,000, and the median house price in Sydney is $1,381,000. Yeah, coming in fourth, probably unsurprisingly, that it would be next in line is Brisbane at $848,000. But yes, most people would think that Melbourne and Brisbane would take second and third place. There was a period during the mining boom about 13, 14 years ago where Perth actually was the highest median price in the country for a short period. That's dropped well back in the pack at the moment, and the median house price in Perth is $646,000.
Only problem is you've got to live in Perth though, Peter. It's too hot over there.
Yeah, great weather, great city. I'm a bit of a fan of Perth, actually. Underrated city in many ways, but that's, as we discussed earlier, that's had a price rise of 8.8% for houses and 7.2% for apartments this year. A lot of the migration that's coming into the country is heading into Perth.
Yeah, look, unsurprisingly, with a median like that, I must admit I'm a little bit surprised, given the areas of the market that are seeing such, I guess, strong price rises, and I'm talking about the kind of commodities market here more so than the property market. I'm a little bit surprised that places like Perth, that are our national epicenter for minerals and commodities and all that kind of lifestyle, that they're not doing or performing better in the property front like they did during the boom all those years ago.
Look, that's probably a broader conversation. The wealth's not necessarily getting spread right across the economy in Perth. Lots of state government spending there on infrastructure under the McGowan government. So it's very much go-ahead Perth. Having been to Perth 20 years ago and been back a few years ago, the infrastructure spending that's gone on in there is quite good. And let's be honest, not everyone's interested in driving property prices higher, because the higher we drive property prices on ourselves, the more we've just got to give the bank to pay it back.
Well, look, shifting a little bit more local, let's go hyper-local now. You mentioned to me the other day you had some interesting insights into Glebe as an area that we sort of service a lot as an agency. Tell me a little bit about what's happening in Glebe and what you think is information that people might find useful.
Oh, look, I just think it's indicative of how markets work, where there's markets within markets. So taking a macro look at the national roundup there and then going to hyper-local. And if you pick Glebe and maybe it's smaller brother next door in Camperdown, if you like, both markets have got similar trend lines happening at the moment where their housing markets are comfortably stronger than what their apartment markets are. And the reason that is that there's been so much apartment development over the last 20 years in Glebe and Camperdown. Probably the two signature projects in both suburbs are obviously Harold Park in Forest Lodge, Glebe there, and the Children's Hospital conversion in Camperdown. What we're seeing is that whilst I've given numbers there on how each city's performing, the reality is that we can't talk generically too much about house prices as consumers to understand what's going on, because a discussion about Australian house prices or Sydney apartment prices is not really nuanced if you are looking to buy an apartment in Glebe versus a house in Camperdown, for example.
I must admit, again, I'm a little bit surprised. All the work that I've done in Glebe, for example, all the work that I've done in Camperdown, whilst there is a large swathe of beautiful terraces and old houses there, I feel like the vast majority of people coming to these, inner city pockets are your downsizers who are, selling up the big family home somewhere and moving into a beautiful apartment with a view or an aspect. Is that not the case that we're seeing these kinds of people? And if so, why is that not reflecting necessarily in the
demand
prices?
is there, but so is the supply.
Okay, so it's matching with what people want.
I wouldn't say it's matching one seller for one buyer, but there is more apartment supply due to signature projects over a 20-year period, which is the vision that Chris Minns, the current Premier of New South Wales, has. He's got the mantra, we can't keep building Sydney out, we've got to build it up, which is code for we want to see more Harold Parks and Trio city quarter developments in the inner city. I'm not here to debate that. All I'm saying to people that are looking is that you can't talk about Glebe as though it's one market. There's the Glebe apartment market, which is very strong in its own right, but say the Glebe housing market, which is severely undersupplied, is actually really robust at the moment due to that undersupply of stock. I think what's really important this spring is that we haven't seen the surge of stock that was predicted due to the mortgage cliff. That's the big takeout as we're now halfway through spring, aren't we, as we record this?
Sadly, yeah.
So there has been nowhere near the amount of stock that has come to market across the board as people would have predicted earlier in the year. You would have thought by the time we get to spring, more than half the market will have had to reset to deal with the mortgage cliff, and that will drive people to the market. What's interesting is most agents saw more stock in winter than they were predicting, but they've been a little bit undersupplied or subdued levels of stock in spring.
I'm glad you segued there, because I was going to piggyback off your supply comment and talk about spring supply. It's something that real estate agents consistently spruik is after Australia Day and then after the long weekend in spring is when you bring all your stock to market. And you mentioned there that we're not seeing the same levels. As we mentioned last time, we talked about people who were interested in getting their settlement done and sort of moving into the end of this year, next period, efficiently could still do so. Do you think that people have made active choices to try and sell before the end of the year from what you've seen? And do you think that we're going to see a bit of an uptick as we head towards December and January?
Yeah, I still think it will come. The additional stock and talk about this rate rise will cause some people to say that's the signal that we need to get cracking on this. So certainly in the last fortnight, people wanting to have the discussions about selling has gone up, and we've been in this game long enough to know that if we're having those discussions, others are as well. So I think home buyers will see more choice heading into Christmas, which means as a seller, you're going to have a little bit more seller competition than what has been around for the last few months. Vendors have had a pretty good run in the last 3 months, but if there is a bounce in stock levels combined with a lot of chatter around interest rate movements, the game might just even up a little bit more as to where it's been in the last 3 months.
Yeah, I think it'll certainly be interesting to see if the RBA does decide to go up next month, whether we do see a sudden influx of sellers. I think, Peter, as we move toward the end of the episode, I thought we might start our discussions around what's happening as we move towards the end of the year. As I just mentioned, we talked a couple of weeks ago about getting ready to sort of sell and settle before land tax comes on board at the end of the calendar year. But as we sort of move towards, as you say, we're halfway through spring now. As we sort of move towards a close to our year in 2023, what do you think is going to happen across the market? Obviously, we've touched on the interest rates and maybe some more stock, but how do you think the market's going to respond, and what's the conditions going to be like out there for sellers and for buyers?
Well, I think cost of living is a real big one. Socially, I'm hearing it more and more from friends that are just feeling the bite of the higher rates and the squeeze that's on at the moment. So whilst they're getting squeezed with higher rates, we're all getting squeezed by, higher significant expenses in the economy. So I think that's one to watch. And does that start to play through and really impact people's housing decisions and what they do from there? I'm expecting, because there is no relief in terms of the number of people who are inviting into the country, the rental market gets very lively from December till the end of February. So I'm expecting to see a sharp jump in rents, actually. I know a couple of months ago we were a little bit confused where one economist said they expected the rental market to fall next year because interest rates would fall next year. And it was rising interest rates that are the catalyst for rents going up. Well, it's looking certainly possible that rates will go up at least one more time. Even if they don't go up, there's no rate cut in the system, and the government are inviting too many people into the country without any meaningful construction taking place in the short term. So the rental market's going to shift up for sure from here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked We've talked previously, as you mentioned, about rental prices and how we were a little bit surprised at some of the commentary, but also just at, the winter kind of, I guess the dullness that comes in the rental market around winter didn't really feel that way this year. It was quiet in terms of numbers, but people were still competing. And it was an indication that, hey, when stock hits hard, it's going to be a hot market.
In a market sense, that's called a higher low. We still had the seasonal low, but the seasonal low was higher than it normally was. Would that be fair from what you've seen over the last few years in the property management market through winter?
Oh, look, absolutely. I'm typically, winter's a great time to find a rental because there's not a lot of competition and you might be the only person at the property. But we still, had people competing, offering more money off their own bat just to lock something in.
So you're absolutely right in nailing that trend. It's called higher lows and therefore it'll be higher highs.
Yeah, which is pretty terrifying if you are looking for a rental, let's be honest. It's already a hot market, as you say. I'm interested to get a bit of a sense, just kind of quickly, if rates are on hold for the rest of this year, what segments of the market do you think are probably best positioned to perform well as we come towards Christmas and even the new year?
I think desirable stock that is undersupplied. So we're talking harbourfront apartments, which appeal to baby boomers and downsizers, and they've been in vogue for the last sort of 4 or 5 years now as the migration of downsizers and baby boomers from their family home to more luxurious, less maintenance type living has taken place. And then larger family homes closer to the city have done very well for the last 18 months and will continue to do so when there's just not enough of those coming to the market for the number of buyers that are turning up to the inspections.
Yeah, very, very fair. I'm interested then, just as we wrap up, Peter, I've been thinking about this for a little while, but I thought what we could do toward the end of every episode, I'd love to get just one sort of thing that surprised you this week in property that you didn't necessarily predict or think about when the week started. Something that might have happened or a conversation you might have had that just doesn't hold step with what you kind of saw coming this week.
Well, let's go to Louis Christopher's auction clearance rates for the week ending the 15th of October. The final clearance rate for the week was 51.7% from 1,102 scheduled auctions. For the same week last year, the clearance rate was 46.4%. So clearance rate's about, what are you saying there, 10% better this year. But it was from 812 auctions on the same weekend last year. So that is suggesting that stock levels are up 20% this spring on last spring. But as I say, I think relative to the buyer demand out there is the market could absorb more quality stock if it comes to market, such as the attendance at open houses at the moment. So that just shows you this time last year, vendors really went to ground because we're running nearly 30% higher auction clearance rates. Maybe there was a lower confidence in the auction sale process last year than what there was this year, but that hasn't really been rewarded because the clearance rate is only up 10% on what it was for the same time last year, which was pretty weak.
That just tells me that as a society, potentially, over the last, let's say, 4 years, we've become accustomed to just accepting new norms. And I feel like that increase is partially people just accepting that, hey, higher rates are here for now. Higher inflation is here for now. We are paying through the teeth for everything. And we've just got to get out there and sell anyway and buy and move on in the market because the world's continuing to move on around us. Does that sound reasonable?
To a degree, you need a financial institution that will back your game plan. So there's got to be some preparedness or ability to meet the challenges that are in front of you when you start buying and selling real estate, because if it doesn't look good on paper, the banks won't let it happen.
Clearly that's happening though. If we've got high clearance rates and higher stock levels, the banks must be behind this.
It's happening, but I just don't think it's a completely confidence-driven thing. You could argue the other way, that there was an absolute lack of confidence unnecessarily late last year. The fear was overdone in the market. I think that would be one explanation. People who've enjoyed good pay rises in the last 12 months would be helping fuel the confidence in the market at the moment. They've got more money in their pocket, whether they're first home buyers entering the market or baby boomers downsizing or someone who's just enjoyed a good bonus at work. That money's going straight back into real estate.
As always, really helpful insights, Peter. I love having a chat with you about what's happening across the market. That's a wrap for us today. It's been a really good chat. I look forward, as always, to chatting to you next week.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Ciaran.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next week on Current Market Insights.
Thanks for joining us on the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate, the podcast providing real estate insights you won't find anywhere else.